The first block of questions is about the background about your life. So as you think about where you are today, how would you depict the journey that's brought you to this place? So what are the central commitments in your life? What does your career look like? What do you consider your most significant lifetime achievements professionally? And I'll say to this point, because it seems as though you've got a long, there's a long and illustrious career ahead of you. So yeah.
Well, everything in my life has got me to where I am today. And just over the weekend, I was a keynote speaker at 2 events. And at both of those events, I heard the word self-made from people in the audience. And I was very clear to correct them and say, nobody is self-made. Nobody at all is self-made. We're all made from our community, from our whānau, our family, from those who have had different parts of their journeys interweave with our journeys. That's how we've all been made and how we've managed to get to where we are. And someone had said to me, you must be self-made because look at what you're doing this weekend. And I said, I'm only here because my husband's at home looking after our 5-year-old. So I can't do what I do without him doing what he does. And I was at the other event on the Saturday where my mum was there. I was like, I'm here because my mum is an early childhood teacher who has inspired me to come and speak to you all, who are a group of play centre coordinators from around the country. And so all of these things have come directly from my upbringing and from every experience that I've had in my life has created who I am. And I think it's really important that we reflect on that and that we honour that as wahine, but especially as an Indigenous woman. There is a whakatauki that says ka mua ka muri. In order to look forward, you must firstly look back. Mm-hmm. And everything that I am comes from what has come before me. And so I was raised in South Auckland, which Auckland is the biggest city in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but South Auckland sort of has a reputation for being a low socioeconomic part of Auckland. It has lots of Māori and Pacific Island people who live here. We're often seen as a crime hub or all of these, headlines that come out in the news. But I had the most incredible upbringing here. And I am from an iwi, from a tribe who is from here. And so my hapu is Te Ahiwaru and Te Ākitai. And my iwi is Te Waiohua and Waikato. And all of those hapu and iwi, what we call mana whenua or ahika to this area. So my ancestors arrived here 800 years ago. My tupuna hape came here on the back of a stingray. He had clubbed feet. He has this, incredible story of resilience and coming here when people told him that he couldn't, that he wasn't of able body, and so even just those stories alone feed into who I am today. I am the eldest grandchild of my grandparents, and my mum was the eldest daughter. And so my grandmother was the eldest, my mother was the eldest, and I am the eldest. And in traditional Māori culture, often the eldest is raised with their grandparents. And so my mum gifted me to my grandparents to raise me. And I interviewed my mum a couple of years ago, and for the very first time I asked her, why was I raised with my grandparents? And she, at the time, she was a single mum, so my father had left when I was 2, and she said, I wanted to give you something that I couldn't give you. I wanted to give you an upbringing and surrounded by my parents. And so it was a really beautiful reflection to think that growing up with my grandparents meant that I was at the marae all the time. I was learning from my grandmother, who was an early childhood teacher. My grandfather was a kaumātua at the marae. I was going to marae meetings from the time I was 8 years old. I was raised with my grandparents in a time that they were coming towards the end of their careers, and so they had more time and aroha to give, and maybe even more than what they gave their own children, because at the time they were raising their children, they were, building a house and building a life and working and all of those sorts of things. So I was really privileged in my upbringing, being raised in what we call being raised in the village, or being raised by the village, and that I had my grandparents. My auntie, who's my mum's younger sister, she lived in the same household that I lived in, and she ran a business. And so I learned all about business through her. And my first job was in her hair salon. And, and then of course I still had my mum. And my mum is an incredibly strong woman who I think I get a bit of my stubbornness from her. And so all of these things created me. And then when I was at high school, so I went to a Decile 1 school. So in Aotearoa, we have 10 deciles, and 10 is, high socioeconomic community, probably quite wealthy families living in good neighborhoods. And 1 is at the complete opposite end of the scale. And so I went to a Decile 1 school. I, as I said, was a Māori-Pasifika woman. So my whakapapa has connections to Rarotonga and Mangaia in the Cook Islands. And then I also have whakapapa to Ngāti Pikiao and Ngāpuhi, so 2 other iwi here in Aotearoa. And at school, it was just expected that the students at my school probably weren't going to succeed, probably weren't going to go to university, probably were going to leave school early, probably were going to get pregnant at a young age. Like, these were the statistics that were coming out of schools in South Auckland. And so when I got to my final year of high school, I went to my careers teacher, and she said, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And I was the co-head girl of school that year, and I ended up being the Ducks. And yet my high school teacher, my high school careers teacher said to me, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go and do the communications degree at AUT, and I want to be a journalist. And she said, that's the hardest degree to get into at that university. I think you should try something else. And so even though I had been achieving at school, she just didn't have that belief that a young Māori-Pasifika woman from South Auckland in a Decile 1 school was going to make it to get into that university. And so this beautiful, big, boisterous Samoan man, his name was Ronji Tanielu, he came to our school and he said to me, why don't you apply for the Vice Chancellor Scholarship? And no one had ever believed in me in that way, and he was from South Auckland and he was Samoan. And I said, okay. So I applied and I got it. And I got a full scholarship to go to university, and I got into the communications degree, and I finished it in 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And that really, that conversation I had with that teacher, and not all of our teachers were like that, but, this careers teacher was. And I think there were like 27 students in our final year of high school. So, that's not a lot when you think about how many people made it to the end of high school. And 25 of us went on to higher education or went into trades.
Wow.
And that was our own resilience. That was our own drive. And of course, supported by some of the other teachers that were there. And then I did the degree at AUT. I did an extended major in journalism. And when I was at AUT, I became what we call the token Māori, which a lot of Indigenous people probably feel in Western systems and Western workplaces, and, where there's a Western framework. And so whenever anybody had a question about Māori language week, matariki, it was ask Qiane. And I was so over it. I'm like, how am I supposed to know all that there is to be in Te Ao Māori? And so in my final year, I was like, I don't want to work in Māori media. I'm going to be typecast as only being able to do Māori stories. And I went through my final year and I interned at a few different places. And then I got offered a job at Mana magazine, which was the leading Māori magazine in Aotearoa. And I took it. And so I always talk about my tupuna, my ancestors knowing better. And my tupuna were like, no, this is what you're doing. Yeah. So they put me on that pathway. And so I went to Mana for a few years, and there was only 3 staff at this magazine. It was like the biggest Māori magazine in the country, had a long legacy. Yeah. And I was really privileged to be part of that team, because it came, it was called Mana, but it also came with Mana. Like, it came with the status of being part of it. And I was there for 3 years under Derek Fox and Catherine Finlay. And I went in as a staff writer. And when I left there, I was selling advertising, I was flat planning, I was producing, I was, taking photos, I was shooting covers, I was writing cover stories, I was getting exclusive interviews. And so it really grew me in that storytelling space. In terms of getting my start in storytelling, I talk about mana being my first job and being where I honed my craft, but my storytelling came from when I was a kid. When I was 2 years old, my grandmother interviewed me in what we would now call a podcast, but it was like a tape recorder, cassette tape recorder. And she interviewed me at 2, and she talked all about, asked me who I was, what my favorite songs were. We sang songs on this interview tape. And so I think I was destined to be a talker and to tell stories because it was something that I'd done when I was really, really little. But mana really honed those skills and taught me how to do it as a trade, and taught me how to engage with all of these different kinds of communities. I was talking with kuia, with old women up in the far north, and then I was talking with celebrity bands who were top of the charts in New Zealand. And so this diverse group of people that I got to interview and share stories about was incredible. And so from there I got poached and I went to Specific magazine and became their deputy editor when I was 25.
Wow.
And I peaked really early. You can't go too much further than a deputy editor. You can be an editor, but essentially I was doing the editor's role. The editor got made redundant when I got appointed, and I couldn't be given the editor's role because when you make a position redundant, you can't fill it again.
Right.
So I was a deputy editor for a company called Specific magazine, and so they were Pacific Islander Māori magazine. And I worked there for a couple more years, and I realized a few things during that time. One was that I really hate people telling me what to do. I'm not a very good employee. I'm quite strong-headed, and I enjoy my mana motuhake. I enjoy, that self-determination and being able to live life on my terms. And so it was a little bit hard for me in the end. But also my 15-year-old sister was about to have a baby. And so between that and my mum, I was suffering through infertility at the time. And so my mum was like, moko, yay. Which is actually, we put it into context. I remember our neighbor saying to us, oh, what's going to happen? Your teenage daughter's having a baby. And my mum's like, whoa, my 20-something-year-old daughter who's been with her partner since she was 18 still can't have a baby. So let's just celebrate the baby. What are we going to do? Yeah. This is what it is. So I left that job, and I'd already started a business. So when I was working at Mana, I'd already started a business working as a sole trader and doing comms and doing photography. And so I carried that all the way through. And when I decided that it was time for a change, I went full-time into my business and then supported my sister for about 6 weeks before she went back to school. She went back to high school. My mum's an early childhood teacher, so baby went to preschool. Wow. And I went into my business. And so, all of these things, all of these experiences have just added little bits to who I am, what I do. And so I've been in my business now for about 16 years, moved it into a limited liability company a few years ago, and turned it into QIANE+co so that I could bring on some co's, on some contractors to come and support me. And my business is multimedia production, and we support organizations, businesses, iwi, government, individuals who are doing incredible work in the social and environmental space. Definitely led by Indigenous values. I'm very picky with who I work with, and it's great. And so I've had my business, and business has taught me a lot, and I've met so many people and be able to do so many things. And so from a career perspective, that's been that side. And then there's this other side, which is like a very long answer to this question, but the other side is just who I am as a wahine Māori. And as I said, my grandparents would take me to marae meetings from when I was 8 years old. So the first Sunday of every month at 10 a.m, you know, your marae, your village comes together and you meet all about issues and what's happening and how do we support each other and all these sorts of things. And so I was involved in governance from a very, very young age, and I was able to work in the marae. I was able to run fundraising committees where we'd have these big community galas and fundraise money to build our new dining room and all these sorts of things. And so my heart was really grew in that marae. Like, our marae is my second home. It was my grandfather's first home. He preferred to be at the marae than being at home. And so when I kind of got to my teen years and older, I became really involved in the governance of our marae. I was the chairperson of our hauora committee, so our health committee. Myself and our team would run screening days for women and pamper days for our kaumātua and kuia, for our old people, and we'd go on trips and we'd do smoking cessation programs and, you know, all these different things. And so I then started gaining all of this experience, lived experience, by doing all of these other things. And I, in 2014, with 5 of my cousins, launched a campaign called SOUL Protect Ihumātao. And we had found out that the government had changed the laws in New Zealand to allow for fast-tracked housing, special housing areas. And one of those was going to happen in our papakainga on ancestral land, on top of burial caves. And in Ihumātao, where I live, we've already been encroached by airport, by factories, but, you know, there's been pollution of our awa, our river, there's been pollution of our moana, our harbour. And so it was like, enough is enough. We'd grown up with the stories of our grandparents telling us how they would live off the land and how they would get kaimoana, seafood, straight out of the sea, how my grandmother would get freshwater crayfish in the river that's just behind our house. And she couldn't do that 2 generations later. And so we launched this campaign to stop the development and have the land returned, because it was unjustly confiscated in 1863. And so I became strategic comms and co-leader of that campaign, and it made international headline news in 2019 when we went head to head with the police on the whenua. And we had a very passive, peaceful resistance. And we're still fighting that now, 8 years later. However, we're in a much better position now because the government bought out the developer, and we're now working with the government to have the land returned. And so all of that diverse experience, from my upbringing to my career to just who I am as an Indigenous woman and the responsibilities I have to my people and to my land, have all kind of made me who I am today. Nice. And they all came to a head, but they all interwove themselves when I created NUKU. And so NUKU is the kaupapa that I started, that is very much focused on wahine and Indigenous women. And it didn't just get plucked out of thin air. You know, it came with a whole lot of experience beforehand. But in 2016, my grandmother died really suddenly and really unexpectedly. And at that time, my husband and I had still been suffering through infertility and had still been unable to fall pregnant, and had gone through fertility treatments and Indigenous treatments and all of these different things. And so when my nana died, some people label it today as, you know, depression or, you know, all these kind of mental health labels. But we have this atua in Te Ao Māori called whiro. And whiro is the name of one of the moon cycles. So it's the new moon. So when there's no moon, which is darkness and black. And whiro is also the name of the atua who is the atua of sort of like disease or sickness or that kind of stuff. And to wānanga is to talk and to sit down and to, you know, like express ideas and have long-winded conversations. And so when my grandmother died, I say, I had my wānanga with whiro. You know, that's my Indigenous perspective, is that I didn't fall into a state of depression. I had my wānanga with whiro. And when I was ready to finish my wānanga with whiro, then I would have my wānanga with the next atua.
Right.
And at the time that my grandmother died, I was questioning who I was as a woman, because a lot of who I was as a woman came from the woman around me.
Yeah.
And what did it mean to be a woman who couldn't have children? What did it mean to be a woman who didn't have that intergenerational knowledge being shared anymore?
Right.
What did it mean to be a woman who was a journalist who didn't get the story of her grandmother before her grandmother died? You know, what did it mean to be all of these things? And I was questioning them all. And then I was thinking about that intergenerational wisdom and how I just lost a whole generation and how I hadn't yet produced the next generation. And what does that mean as an Indigenous woman when you have a responsibility to the 7 generations in front of you?
Yeah.
And during that time of wānanga, I was undergoing romi, which is a Māori health practice, which is like a very intense, very painful deep tissue bone massage, you know, like it's physically very painful.
Yeah.
Emotionally it can also be quite painful.
Yeah.
And I was undergoing this kind of treatment to just help me release the grief and help me, you know, all of that sort of stuff. And I naturally fell pregnant. And I fell pregnant, and then I said to my husband, just before we went into our 12-week scan, I said, we're having a girl. She's going to be born at 38 weeks on the full moon, and her name is Haere Te Kapua. He was like, whoa. What are you even talking about? This is your first pregnancy. And I told my mum. My mum was like, oh, okay. And I told my midwife was like, it's your first baby. You don't really know. I said, no, I know. 38 weeks on the full moon, baby girl. So we went into our 12-week scan. And I said to the sonographer, can you tell what we're having? And she goes, normally we wait for the 20-week scan. And she's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're having a girl. Oh, yeah. Looked at my husband. He's like, oh, you know, 50% chance that you were right.
Yeah.
Now, my husband comes from 11 boys. And so he just expected that there was going to be a boy in there.
Yeah, seriously.
I come from a line of girls. And so I was like, no, my genes are stronger. And so I then started thinking about my responsibility in raising a young Māori, Cook Island, Tongan woman, because my husband is Tongan, in Aotearoa, in a Western framework, in a Western world. What did that all mean? And as I was growing this baby, I was growing NUKU. And I feel like NUKU came with her from the wānanga, from wherever she came from. And my baby at 38 weeks on the supermoon was born. And her name is Haere Te Kapua, and with her came the kaupapa NUKU. And so
wow.
None of us are ever self-made. We are made by all of these things and all of these experiences.
So NUKU is amazing. I have the book, and I've looked at some of the podcasts. I haven't listened to them quite yet, but that is amazing. And the story that you've just related is in the introduction to the book, which is astounding to me. And that fueled into my interest in what you do, really, because, you know, like I like to interview older women and get their stories and think about what their lives, you know, where they've come from, what society was like when they were, you know, growing up and all of that. So this is wonderful to hear that there is this history that can be this intergenerational for your daughter and for others, you know, other generations beyond, that they can actually see and hear. You know, and relate to their culture. It's wonderful. It's really nice to look at the book. Yeah.
And it really is about the diversity of what it is to be an Indigenous woman today, but also the diversity of what success means and looks like. You know, one of the wahine has 10 children under the age of 15. I'm like, damn, you are successful. You know, like, wow. We think that success comes with awards or comes with accreditations or comes with
money or
lots of money or this particular job position, but actually success is way more diverse than that. And I wanted to show not only our tamariki and our mokopuna, not only our children and our grandchildren, that I not only wanted to show them people who looked like them and sounded like them or had lived experiences like people in their family, so they could relate to all of these things and be like, wow, they're in a podcast and they're on a book and their voice is being amplified, you know? Not only that, but I wanted to show ourselves, because often we do a lot of stuff for our young people, we do a lot of stuff for our youth, and we help the youth. But there's a lot of us that are my age, that are older than me, that are my grandmother's age, who are still dealing with intergenerational trauma, who are still dealing with intergenerational land loss, who are still dealing with the effects of the urban drift from moving away from our small rural villages and communities into the city to find work. And that's had a flow-on effect with how connected those people are to home. And then that feeling of not being enough. You're not enough to fit in the Western world, but then you're not enough to fit in an Indigenous world. And are you only Māori if you wear a moko kauai and you speak your language? Or what if you're a Pacific woman who lives in diaspora in Aotearoa because your family came here for work in the 60s? You know, like that doesn't, none of these things make you any less of a woman, let alone any less of an Indigenous woman. And I wanted to show ourselves that we are enough as we are, how we are in this world. And there's always time, and it's never too late to go home. It's never too late to learn this thing. It's never too late to whatever it is that might continue to fill your cup that little bit more. And I mean, NUKU's been quite successful. It was very much a self-funded, mostly self-funded project, or kaupapa. It's a social enterprise that sits underneath my business, and my business helps to just operate the financial side of things, but otherwise it sits in its own space. It was my best, you know, some of my best and closest friends who came on board to help make that happen. And we would go off and we'd, you know, make a little bit of money and go off and do the next thing and interview some people. And so our youngest was 14 and our oldest was in her mid-70s. 100 women from the top of the North Island, or from Waitangi, not quite the top, but from Waitangi down to Ōtepoti, Dunedin in the south, across both coasts and over to Rekuhu Chatham Islands. And then I self-published the book, and the book made it to, so the book was a finalist in the Ockham New Zealand Book Awards. It was the only self-published book to be a finalist. It was the PANZ Book Design Awards. We're a top seller in Aotearoa, so we're one of the top selling books, and I've just signed a deal with Penguin Publishers, who are going to print the third. So I've printed 2 print runs. They're now going to print the 3rd print run, with the idea that they will be able to get it into more retail outlets and take it international. But we've got into 150 retail outlets nationwide on our own. Aotearoa is a small country. Michigan probably has 150 outlets just in one little town, but you know.
Right, that's wonderful. Congratulations, because then Penguin can actually distribute it. Like, that's global. Fantastic.
They can. Excellent. And so all of these different things have been happening. And I know you asked the question, you know, what's maybe one of the career highlights or that sort of stuff. And to be honest, none of those things are career highlights for me. The highlights for me come when I got an email from a dad who talked about dropping his 2 daughters off, 7 and 9, his 2 daughters off to school every morning, and every morning they'd listen to a NUKU podcast. Now that, to me, trumps anything. When my daughter stands in the mirror and draws a moko kauai on her face, you know, because that's what she sees as beautiful, because she sees it in NUKU, you know, when she's out in the supermarket and she's like, Mama, you should interview that wahine for NUKU, just because she sees a wahine, you know, but because she can see the value in women, because she's been brought up that way. And so she just sees a woman, has no idea who that woman is. She's like, Mama, you should interview her for NUKU. She already sees the specialness in wahine. And so all of those things are great. Like, I've won journalism awards, I've won photography of the year awards, I've, you know, all that kind of stuff. Cool. Thanks. I appreciate it. I'm grateful for it. It looks really good when I've got to apply for funding and investments. But that's not what drives me. What drives me is the little incremental change that's made from the work that I'm able to do.
Oh, fantastic. So not even the recent King's Birthday Award that you received has...
Look, if I'm completely honest, it was the hardest award to accept, and I was 99% close to declining. And my mother and my husband wouldn't let me decline. But, you know, I do a lot of things for other people, so I thought, oh, I better give them this one thing. Yeah. But the King's Honour, so I received, I'm now a member of the New Zealand Order of Merit. So I received an honour in the most recent King's Coronation, King's Birthday honours list. And the reason it was so hard to accept is because everything that the King and the British monarchy stand for is everything I've spent the last 20 years working against.
Right. Yeah.
And so trying to decolonize our thinking, working to help in the self-determination of Māori and Pasifika people, to indigenize our thinking and changing our Western frameworks is something that I've been doing my entire career. However, I'm also very clear that it's highly likely the King doesn't even know that I got this thing. And that it's an award from Aotearoa for services to Aotearoa. Right. And when I looked at that particular line of, we want to recognize the work, the commitment that you have made to serve the people of Aotearoa, I thought, yeah, okay, that I can accept, because that I have done. I found my purpose really early in life, and I got it down into sort of one line. It's a very long line, but I amplify the voices of marginalised people in their communities so that we can change the narrative for future generations. Yeah. And if this award means that my voice is amplified, then that means the voices I represent are further amplified. And so by accepting, it only gives me another platform to amplify those voices that need to be heard the most. And so with that, I accepted, and the investiture ceremony was happening in September. Oh, wow. Yeah, so I'm still a little bit, you know, I tell people to sit in their uncomfortability a lot. And one of my friends said to me, maybe you just need to sit in your uncomfortability. And I was like, okay. So I just sit in an uncomfortable space. I don't expect me to ever feel comfortable about it, but I know both sides, and I'm quite happy to just sit uncomfortably in the middle. Well, you know, so yeah, in a way, your uncomfortability is making those people who might believe in the people who gave you the award, it's making them uncomfortable too, but they have to, so, you know, the visibility is out there, and it's kind of like feminism. You need to have men on board to, you know, for it to work. So you need to have Pākehā on board and the Crown on board for it, you know, to work. It is very funny though, because I was very aware that I am, you know, my name is known in the activism space, not as much as others, and I haven't done anywhere near as much activism as some of the most incredible Māori out there, but my name is known in that space. And I was like, they'll let me into Parliament. And the very next day after the awards were nominated, I was in Wellington for a speaking event for the Ministry for Women. And I know a few people in Parliament. I was like, hey, can I come and have a cup of tea? Because I actually just wanted to see if I could get in the door. It's like, the last time I was here, I was protesting outside. So I'm just wondering if they'll let me in the door. So that was fun. They did let me in. I got in. Yeah. Actually, that's where I saw you. I saw you on that it was some kind of a seminar about from the Ministry of Women that was broadcast like a month ago, maybe. Yeah, so it was at the National Library, and it was Manatū Wahine, Ministry for Women, the Leadership and Legacy. That's right. Yeah, alongside some pretty incredible wahine. Oh, you were pretty incredible yourself there. That was really good. Yeah. But yeah, earlier that day, I just come from Parliament. So you've answered a lot of my
questions already. So I was going to next sort of fold into what drew you to the work that you do, but you've answered that. You've talked a little bit about the one that really interests me in this particular block of questions is how has change in your work shaped your life, and how has the change in your life shaped your work? And you've spoken to that quite a bit, but is there anything you want to add specifically?
I think if I focus on NUKU,
yeah,
interviewing 100 women is not only an incredible honor and privilege, but it is life-changing.
Yeah.
It is absolutely life-changing, and it's healing. And I don't think I realized the healing that was needed until I got to the end and realized how healed I was.
Right.
And, you know, as I said, I didn't capture my grandmother's story. I've got parts of her story, but I didn't sit with her and just get her whole story. And I will always live with a little bit of regret with that. And so I went out and I told 100 other women's stories to try and make up for it. No, not to try and make up for it, but you know. And so being able to sit with these women, especially the queer, especially those older women who come with that lifetime of lived experience and knowledge and wisdom. Every single woman that I spoke to gave me more strength, gave me more knowledge, gave me more tools, gave me more ways to think about the world, changed the way I was as a mother, as a wife, as a wahine, you know, like, and even if it was just one little thing, imagine that 100 times, you know, 100 times. And there are people who have listened to all 100 podcasts, and like, we have the book, and the book is amazing. Toot my own horn, the book is amazing.
Beautiful. No, it's gorgeous. Yeah.
But there's also nothing like listening to those words from the voices of those women.
Yeah.
And the way that their tone and the way that they speak. And there were just things that I had learned. So Ngāhuia Murphy was researching Indigenous knowledge around menstruation.
Right.
The way that I talk to my daughter about menstruation is completely different to the way that my mother and my grandmother spoke to me about it, you know? And it's purely because of my work, because of work that I've been able to do, the knowledge I've been able to gain, the experiences I've been able to have. And now what I share with my daughter is so different, and it's beautiful. And she's got all these words for it, you know? She's got books about it. She knows about ikura and our connection to the first wahine, Hine Ahone, and then Hine Titama, and, you know, all of these atua that I may have shared that with her, but I may not have. I don't know. Right, I don't know until, you know, like I am in this world, I am in this space right now because of a career that has centered me on all of these pūrākau and all of these stories. And it has definitely changed my life. My work has changed my life. My work has changed the life of my daughter. And I think how my life has changed my work is that every experience that I have changes the way I approach what I do. And so it's all just this circular, you know, as I grow, the work grows. As the work grows, I grow. And it's the same with, you know, I do a lot of speaking at the moment, like speaking at conferences or running workshops. And so my life now also informs the work that I'm able to do and share with others, and help them to find their tuakiritanga, their identity, to help them build the narrative for their businesses, to help them, you know, all of these different things that I've experienced and the way that I've done it in my way, I'm now able to share with others. So there's always this beautiful connection and relationship that's ongoing.
Yeah, but I had a really meta moment then when you're talking about the honor of interviewing 100 women, and I've interviewed 11 and I've grown as well. So it was kind of like, but here I'm interviewing the goddess of interviewing. It was like, wow, okay, yeah, I get what you're talking about. It was really, thank you. Yeah, very good. Okay, so let's move on to the third block of questions. So how do you understand the term feminism?
I don't use the term feminism.
Okay.
I understand feminism as championing women, as equity for women, not necessarily equality, because we always talk about equality, and I'm like, well, let's talk about equity, because actually that's probably a better way to describe it. That feminism, I also most of the time see feminism from white women, and that can be quite jarring for Indigenous women, because if feminism isn't intersectional, then it's not for us.
Right.
And lots of people talk about feminism as ensuring men are part of the feminism movement or the feminist movement.
Yes.
But where in feminism do we actually recognize the privilege of women who lead feminism movements? And how are we actually amplifying the intersectional parts of feminism? Where are our disabled representation in feminism? Where is our Indigenous representation in feminism? Now, the reason why I personally don't subscribe or champion specific kupu like feminism is because in Te Ao Māori, we always talk about balance, and that tāne and wahine are equal. And tāne, within yourself, you have your whatukura. Let me just get this right. Whatukura, māreikura.
Right.
So māreikura being your feminine side and your whatukura being your male side within you as a woman.
Right.
And so we have a masculine side and we have a feminine side within all of us. And that doesn't take away from the fact that I champion women 100,000%. I will be in rooms and challenge everybody in that room and only speak to the woman. And I will get out there and unapologetically stand for women and women's rights and Indigenous women, all of these sorts of things. But I do that with the knowledge and understanding that there's always a balance. And so even at the marae, like I'm about to go to the marae, the first voice that we hear on the marae is a karanga from a woman. The first person to speak is a man. And so the woman calls the spirits in and the men send the spirits back. And if you don't have both of those roles, you don't have that process of tapu e noa. Right. And so you cannot have the balance in an Indigenous world without both. Right. And our women are the whare tangata. We are the house of humanity. We are sacred. Our men are what create the tangata, I roto i te whare tangata. Our men have specific roles, our women have specific roles. And without both of those, everything falls over. Right. And it's a very Western whakaaro, very Western thought to say that, well, men are better than anyone else, or the men get to sit in the front, so that must mean they're better. Or the men sit in the front because they're supposed to be protecting the women, so that we don't need protection. No. So, well, actually, from a Te Ao Wairua perspective, from a spiritual perspective, if someone was to throw makutu, a curse, something of some sort, they target the woman, because the women are the house of humanity. Because if you target the woman and the woman falls, you no longer have generations to come after you. Mm-hmm. So the role of the men in that space, yes, is to protect the whare tangata, because the women are so special. Because the men could be a bit disposable. One man. But you know what I mean? Like there is this, it's a very much a non-Indigenous way of thinking when we think about feminism. Yeah. Because we in Te Ao Māori think about the duality. Right. And how, you know, we have Tangaroa, the god of the sea. We have Hine Moana, who is the sea. Right. Yeah. One is a tāne atua and one is a wahine rei. And right. So we have Papatuanuku, who is our earth mother, and we have Ranginui, who is our sky father. But without either one of those, we die. Yeah. You have to have them both. You have to celebrate them both. You have to do different things with different ones of them. And so I do believe that we live in a Western world, and it is very much fact that our women are being beaten at the hands of men. They are being hurt emotionally, spiritually, physically by men. They are also being paid way less than men. They have more laws on their bodies than men. There is no doubt about that from a Western framework and the Western world that we live in. It's about reconnecting to our Indigenous knowledge, reconnecting to our Indigenous practice, that we then begin to understand how we can achieve all of these things by understanding that duality, that balance, and reminding our tāne that the roles that we have as wahine within these spaces. And I think because we've all been brought up, you know, most, if not all, Indigenous cultures around the world, the first thing colonizers did was take our language away, because in that language are all of those answers. In that language are words that you cannot translate into the English language that represent all of those things. And so taking away our language and trying to assimilate us into another culture made us forget that actually we already have all of these practices within our culture. We just have to reawaken them. But that doesn't mean I won't stand up and hold a placard for fair pay for wahine and hands off my body, and you know, let me make decisions about my body by myself. You know, that doesn't take away from any of that. It's just not a word or a movement that I personally associate directly with. Right.
Okay. So I'm mindful of the time, and I know we have to, I've got a few more.
I'm still okay with time. I literally am walking next door. So
okay, good.
I'm okay.
Right. So you've talked a little bit about the relationship between activism, and how you feel about feminism. But the next question talks about, and this might be a difficult one, scholarship, the relationship between scholarship and activism. So how do you perceive that relationship? I mean, is it relevant for you and what you do? And then, so in general, I guess, and then for you specifically.
What do you mean by scholarship?
So I guess any writings, any, and this is to do with feminist scholarship. So it would be any theoretical tomes, any empirical research, any wisdom that you've received, maybe. Yeah.
So I guess everything I do is activism, because everything I do is about pushing against the system and the way we're currently doing things. Every voice that I'm able to amplify is activism. Every story that I write is activism. I've just written a chapter for a book about celebrating 30 years of publishing in Aotearoa, and they asked for my input as a self-published author. That chapter that I put into that book is activism. It's about pushing against the grain of everybody's going to go to a publisher. Here's how you can do it on your own. Here's what story sovereignty could look like. Here's what mana motuhake and publishing could look like. And so I see everything as activism. If you are disrupting a system, however you're disrupting that system is activism. And I think people sort of put activism in a box of you have to be at a march, or you have to be holding a placard, or you have to be standing in front of police, or you have to be whatever. But actually, activism is you as a woman waking up every morning and making a decision for yourself. That is activism. And so if we're thinking about scholarship and activism, if you're researching about topics that no one else is researching, if you're bringing histories back to life, if you're opening doors for people that are coming after you, there's a Indigenous Indian woman named Ākitai who's one of the wahine in NUKU, and she is studying at university, and she decided to do her PhD because she could not quote an Indigenous woman in her work. There was no one that she could quote as an Indigenous woman from the Himalayas. And so she was like, I'm going to go and do this study and do this research and get this qualification so that someone coming after me can quote me.
Right.
That is activism. That is activism. So I see them all as interconnected, as one and the same, as just another form of activism. Women in university is activism. Women voting is activism. I think because, Aotearoa's had the vote for so long,
Yes.
Oh, no, it's still activism. We're still being active in our decisions. We're being active in our pursuit for answers. We're being active in our research. We're being active. The work that you're doing is activism, because the voices that you're bringing to life and allowing the next generation to hear and engage with, my voice is going to be heard in a completely different country. It's going to disrupt someone somewhere.
Yes, hopefully. Yes, yeah.
You have been the channel for that. You've enabled that to happen. So I think it's just the way we maybe think about things. We put them in boxes. Scholarship is this thing, and activism's this thing, and feminism's this thing, but they're actually all the same thing.
Yeah.
We're all everything is connected. And again, it's a Te Ao Māori worldview. It's an Indigenous worldview, that every single thing is connected. So we just have to kind of open our minds up to see how they're all connected, reframe the way we're thinking about it.
Thank you. Nice, very nice answer. So you've really talked about this a little bit, the intersection of your work with women's movement in the country. But so this is a difficult question, I think, or it has been a difficult question. What is your analysis, evaluation, and expectation of the development of feminism, whatever that means to you, in New Zealand? So what's going to happen?
Well, I'm very open about the fact that I want to be building an army of Indigenous women who are empowered and who are so clear on who they are, their tuakiritanga, their identity, that they stand strong in this world. Because when we have more people who are standing strong within themselves, the world changes. And so I have a very clear expectation that it may not be a group of people, it may not be an organization, but I have a very clear expectation that every wahine stands strong in their own tuakiritanga. Part of that is not just Indigenous women, that women who are tangata tiriti, so Pākehā women or women of European heritage, or some might call themselves Kiwi women, however you want to identify, that they also know who they are. And it's really important for a movement, a feminist movement, a wahine movement, for us to truly understand our identities. And some people go, well, I know who I am. I'm a third generation New Zealander. I'm like, where's your maunga? Oh, I live next to this mountain. No. Where's your maunga? Where's the maunga that your ancestors walked on? Where is the awa? Where's the mountain? Where's the river that your ancestors bathed in? Is it in Denmark? Is it in Scotland? Is it in Ireland? Go there. Go there. Walk on your mountain. Understand what your tartan is. Find your family crest. Because when you know deeply your identity, yes, you are also a third generation New Zealander who has this whakapapa, who has this pepeha, who can hono to these tūtohu whenua, so who can connect to these landmarks. It's not just an Indigenous thing. I'm lucky. I live right by my river, by my mountain, by my ocean. I can speak those things to life. When I need healing, I can walk 2 minutes down the road and be healed at the place where my ancestors healed. And today, we're so, yes, we want to contribute to a feminist movement or contribute to a women's movement, but we're not whole. So how do we contribute when we're still empty? How do we give everything when we don't have everything to give? And the thing that we need is tuakiri, is our identity. And I just had this conversation with a woman on Saturday who said, my 2 children love kapahaka, they're not Māori, does that mean they have to stop doing kapahaka? I was like, no, do kapahaka. Kapahaka's awesome, everyone loves kapahaka, go and do that. But do your tamariki know where they're from? Do you know where you're from? And she's like, oh, well, we don't really have culture. Like, how do you not have culture? It's called, because we're Kiwis, and so our culture is a Kiwi culture. I'm like, no, that's part of your culture. But where are your ancestors buried? Go home. And that's not to be offensive at all. That's not to say this is not your home.
No. Yeah.
But I say that to, like, Māori in the city, we say go home. Go home. Go back to Ruatoria. Go back to Kawhia. Go back to wherever it is that your ancestors are from and connect with who you are. And so I say that to everyone who is not of the land that they live in, where are your ancestors from? Find that story, because it builds who you are. Like, I can proudly stand up and say, ko tainui te waka, ko te manukunuku o Hoturua te moana, ko oruarangi te awa, ko te puke tāpapatanga hape te maunga, ko te Waiohua te iwi. You know, I can say all those things because that's where my blood is from. That's where my bones are from. And I feel so much more whole walking in this world because I've got this whole history behind me. I've got this whakapapa behind me, and I've got these landmarks I can always go back to for healing. So I think the future of these movements in Aotearoa is actually individuals in the first instance being whole, or as whole as they can be, understanding that they are enough as you are, how you present right now. Even if you don't know that, you're still enough. And when we have all of that, because you're so full and empowered, you can then walk out the door and be like, that's it. Today, I'm not putting up with this and I'm going to get this thing, you know? We don't have to try and build each other up to be like, we're all going to meet and we're all going to march and we're all going to change the landscape. Because actually, if you were to walk into your business whole, walk into your workplace whole and say, this person's getting paid this much more than me and I want to get paid that. Because you're whole, you're not going to sit there and have someone go, well, no, you're going to go, this is what I want, make it happen. The more of us that can do that, that grows the movement. As well as organizing and coming together as groups and strategizing and having different platforms. All of that helps, but it helps when you come to it whole in the first instance. So that's what I want to see in Aotearoa. I want to see that. I want to see Te Tiriti o Waitangi being incorporated into this idea of women's rights. What does that look like when we have tiriti that honours the tino rangatiratanga, the self-determination of Māori as well as non-Māori? We both deserve, all groups deserve self-determination. What does that actually look like in a feminist women's rights movement? How are we being intersectional about what we're doing? How are we ensuring? You know, people talk about trans rights, a woman, you know, women's rights are trans rights and trans rights and all these sorts of things. And they are, because if one part of society is still marginalized, we're all still marginalized. So we need to be able to support all of these movements. I'm really disappointed in the feminist, I don't want to say it's feminist kōrero, actually. It's people who are using and weaponizing the word feminism to be anti-trans. And who are saying, I just want the right to use the bathroom. I'm like, it's a fucking bathroom. Like, no one wants to come and see what you're doing in the bathroom. I don't know anyone close to me, far from me, in any of the networks I've ever experienced in my nearly 38 years of life who has ever been hurt by a trans person, ever. So why are we as women further ostracizing and further marginalizing more people in our community? Because we know what that feels like. We're only further doing that to ourselves, because then we're growing a movement that's like, oh, well, we're just going to keep hurting people. So, you know, the future is all of these things that we need to think about. There's no one single answer. There's no magic bullet.
No, that's a good answer. And when you were talking about like finding your home, that's quite challenging for a lot of people actually to think about. Okay, so, but no, I'm fourth generation New Zealander. I've been here for so somebody must have come from somewhere for you to be here. So yeah.
And it's just like my tupuna. I can tell you the story of my tupuna hape who lived on Hawaii, who came to Aotearoa. I can tell you the story of my great-great-grandfather who was a stowaway on a ship from Mangaia to Rarotonga to Aotearoa. I've been to Mangaia and stood in the house where he was born. That doesn't make me any less of a New Zealander. It doesn't make me less of a Māori. It just means I am way more fulfilled. I have more. You can't get, like, when it gets to here, that just makes room and more keeps coming. You know, you can never be too full. There's no such thing as being too full. And it's just it's so important for us all to know that, to understand that, to find that, and you'll really witness a change in who you are. Like there was a Pākehā white male police officer who was on the whenua ihumātao, who was opposite me on a front line, who was in my class last year when I was studying Te Reo Māori.
Oh, wow.
And again, I was 37, took a year off to study Te Reo Māori. It's never too late to
No, yeah.
And he stood up at the beginning of the year and he talked about his pepeha. So a pepeha, I'm just translating things for people in America who probably don't know any of these terms.
So can I interrupt you there? You're really going to have to send me or translate your heritage, where you come from, because nobody will be able to understand that. But we can talk about that later, yes.
Yeah, and so, you know, the pepeha is you connecting to landmarks around you. So in Māori culture, we have an awa, a river, or, you know, you might have a waka that your whānau came on. You might have, so a waka's a boat, or type of boat. It's actually, I should say it better, it's a seafaring vessel that our ancestors read the stars to get here. It's a pretty bloody amazing. It's not a paddle one.
Oh, it's not.
It's a big double hull sail waka.
Wow.
Yeah, it crossed oceans. And so he talked about his hononga, his connection to where he currently lived. And so he talked about the forest where he currently lived, and the mountain where he currently lived, and the ocean where he currently lived. And I said to him, oh, are you from this particular iwi? And I said the iwi, which is the tribe. And he goes, oh, no. And I said, then how is that your pepeha? And because in Aotearoa, we've kind of come to a place where everybody goes, well, I live here, so I'll connect to these landmarks. And he's like, oh, well, because I live there. I said, yeah, but that's not your pepeha. That's well, not my pepeha, but that's the pepeha of that iwi.
Yeah, right.
And I said, what's your pepeha? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, well, where's your mountain? What's your marae? And so throughout the year, he started talking with his grandfather and his uncle, and he started having conversations that they'd never had in their family before about their ancestry, and their whole whānau was way more enriched with this knowledge. He has 3 children. He started sharing that with his children. At the end of the year, he stood up and we did our final whakapuaki, which is our final oral exam, which was 1 hour in speaking Te Reo Māori.
Oh.
And he stood up and he did his pepeha, and he talked about his castle in Scotland. Oh. And he talked about the river that went past his castle, and he wore his tartan, and we all just sat there and went, this is your pepeha.
Right.
And he stood so much differently because he connected to these spaces through his whakapapa. He'd heard all the stories about them. He's planning to go and visit these places. And it doesn't take away from the fact that he still lives in Waitakere. Doesn't take away the fact that he still is a 3rd generation New Zealander, that his tamariki are being raised here. Doesn't take any of that away.
Right.
But it adds so much more richness to who he is.
Yeah.
And so if you can imagine all of us having that, feeling that, remembering that, because for Māori, it's I don't want to say it's a natural thing, because actually a lot of people probably still feel quite uncomfortable trying to trace their whakapapa, especially urban Māori who are very disconnected from where they're from. But you know, it's something that I think is an expectation of us as Māori to know where you're from. But when is it ever an expectation of others to know where they're from? And yet it's so important. It's so important to know those things. And imagine the stories that you get to learn. You might have a wahine in your whakapapa. You might have a woman in your ancestry who was a champion for the woman of your area.
Right. Yeah.
And look at that, and then look at you, and then, you know, how do you take inspiration from that? You know, you learn all these stories about these people. They are you. Your ancestors walk with you, not just Indigenous people. We're all Indigenous to somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
So all of those things, I think, is important for the future of women's rights, of women's movements, of amplifying women's voices. I think we need to have more of us telling our own stories and not having our stories being shaped and formed by people who don't have our lived experiences. You know, newspaper editors are often old white men. So where are our women in these spaces? Where are our women in the decision-making tables? But just as I said at that Manatū Wahine kōrero, you know, we're talking about leadership and legacy, and everyone's like, oh, you know, we have this many women on boards now, and we have this many women on this. And I'm like, yeah, but we still have the highest number of incarcerated women in Aotearoa. Māori are the highest rate, have the highest rate of incarcerated women in the world. Right? We can't be talking about how good we're doing on boards when we're all in prison. You know, we need to make sure that if we're up here, we're bringing everybody with us.
Yes.
And that's that intersectionality. You know, we can't say we're winning at the board table when we're losing in the prison table. We have to take all the women with us. We can't just go, oh no, we're going to forget about you, because that's not what this movement is. That's not what women's rights is about. We can't just have rights for some women and not others.
Well, thank you, Qiane. Excellent. But I have one more question, but I'm wondering what let's see if we have time, and if we need to cut it short, you just let me know.
I'll give you a short answer. I'm sorry that they've been so long-winded.
No, it's wonderful. So do you have connections with other activists or organizations in other countries, and how do those connections come about?
So Auntie Pua Case from Mauna Kea is one of the wahine that I am connected with, and that's through NUKU. That's actually through other Indigenous women who connected me with her. But she has been a leader of the Mauna Kea movement for years, and her daughters are a strong, powerful Indigenous woman. And so I have a connection with her and with them in that movement. I don't have as many international connections as what I would like, to be honest. I have always wanted to connect more with, you know, wahine from Turtle Island over there in America, Indigenous women in Australia. I have connections with women across the Pacific, and that's just naturally because we are based in the South Pacific, and so do have connections with wahine there, but I don't yet have the relationships I want to have. And people have said to me, you know, oh, would you do NUKU in another country? Would you go and, you know, do NUKU over in America or do it somewhere else? I'm like, no, I wouldn't, because those are not my stories to tell. But what I would love to do is to connect with wahine from those places, to support them in building a movement to be able to tell their stories. And how can we do that? And so, yeah, Auntie Pua Case, Akitami, who runs Sister Library in India. So her and I keep well connected, and Sister Library is very much an activist movement where everything in her library is written by a woman. And there's a lot of content in there from Indigenous Indian women. And when you look at the caste scale, the caste system that they have in India, Indigenous women don't even feature. So they're not, you know, they're just seen as nothing. They live in militarized communities. And so those relationships I cherish, but don't have lots of, you know, ongoing involvement. It's every now and again when we get to chat and talk and see how we can support each other's work. Yeah, but I'd love to build more. I'd love to come and speak at, you know, different international conferences and things like that. I haven't quite worked out how to do that, but it's really important.
Maybe this will help, and definitely the Penguin launch of the 3rd edition of your book will definitely.
I hope so, because I just think that when we can connect women globally, when we can connect Indigenous women globally, we share and learn from each other's experiences. And I would love to have the opportunity to meet more women internationally, and to be able to speak at more international events where we can share some of that, not just intergenerational wisdom, but cross-cultural wisdom. Because that's really important. You know, how is it working or not working here? How is it working or not working there? What are some things that we can share?
It's nourishing. Yeah, it's wonderful.